So obviously we're here to discuss Steve Jobs. How many people here saw the movie the other night? Great. So the rest of you will have to play catch up, but I think you kind of know the focus of this conversation, right?
Well, why didn't the rest of you see it?
We'll go right to the Q&A. But I think one of the things that's really exciting about seeing you tackle material like this is, it's no secret that this project was around before you were involved with it. Yeah. But you made it your own thing. So what was it like to encounter not just this story, but this particular project as it was in flux and kind of figure out, your way into it?
Well, it was, I knew about the stuff about Fincher dropping out. He's a director I really admire a lot. And I didn't know what was going on. I mean, you just read IMDb and he's dropped out and they're all... And then they're all, I don't know what, they're all probably you think they're probably briefing against each other about why he dropped out and all that kind of stuff. You imagine all that sort of stuff going on. And Christian, where's Christian? Is he here? Yeah, there he is. So Christian and I worked together and we worked together on a number of films and we generate our own material really. And before I knew Christian, I did as well with the producer Andrew MacDonald, and we tend to we have a very small bunch of writers that we tend to work with. And I'd never done a Hollywood project. I've never done something that was generated elsewhere and like fully formed. And so Scott Rudin rang up and said, do you want to read it? And I said I'd be delighted to. And it was astonishing. I mean, it was an astonishing experience reading it, just because it was so original and imaginative about how to approach biopics. I'm not a biopic fan, we'd done one before about Aaron Ralston, the guy who got trapped in that canyon. But again, like this one, it was like based on, it wasn't like a life story from the beginning to end or skimming along. It was an intense experience of one event, and in the Jobs case, it's 3 events, as a way of looking at somebody. And I think it's a more interesting way of doing it. And this guy's motto was think different. So you would expect somebody like Sorkin, with all that confidence he's got and all that ability, to tackle it in a different way. And he did, of course, in a really imaginative way. So it was exhilarating reading it. But it was also like, what role is there for a director in it? Because it's 185 pages of dialogue, whereas most movies are, 120 pages, of which half of is dialogue and the rest is description. There was no description in this. There's no guide, no manual to how to do it. There's just like interior day continuous, 185 pages, and that's it. I mean, seriously.
That's Sorkin.
So, and of course you realise quite quickly that it's an invitation. Of course, if you look at it in the right way, it's an invitation. It's or even a provocation to actually, can you do anything with it?
Well, you hit on something really interesting, bringing up 127 hours, because if there is some sort of connective tissue to a lot of your films, it's this sense of being in confined spaces, whether it's in that canyon or a spaceship, or in this case, back room with Steve Jobs for 2 hours. So, I mean, one of the challenges that you must have faced is making this movie visually interesting, right?
What it is really interesting, it's that, I don't know whether it's a British kind of SM thing or I don't know what it is, but the restriction is really liberating. I mean, it really, no, seriously, it's like really, because if you have a hit, like we had a hit with Slumdog, it was a massive hit. And after that, you can sort of spend a lot of money if you want and do anything you want, sort of, within kind of certain limits. But we never did, because there is something about being, I don't know whether it's siege mentality or it's something about that you have to think in a different way. You just have to approach it in a different way. If you limit your budget, which we tend to do, we tend to always try and work below $20 million, so that you and it's a self-imposed restriction, and because it does influence the kind of material you do as well. Or you go for projects that have that inbuilt demand of you, which is how are you going to make this cinematic? How are you going to kind of open this out or make it compelling? And this had that in it, yeah, because it felt very, when you read it, it was very, it's cyclical, it's the same 6 characters who meet 3 times in the same 40 minutes before these launches. So that was always, whereas that cinema, you want it to be progressive and to feel urgent and linear and forward moving, because movies do that, they move forward, constantly. I always remember we were. I tried to do this film once about this amazing story about those firemen in Worcester. I don't know whether any of you will remember it. 6 of them lost their lives, which was it was a coal storage fire in an old Victorian coal storage in Worcester in Massachusetts. And before 9/11, it was the single greatest loss of life in the fire department in history on one occasion. Anyway, the main character in it died halfway through, and I remember talking to Tim Robbins to do the part, and it was a brilliant part. I mean, dazzling part, although he died halfway. And he said, I'm not going to do that. He said, because nobody will remember me. Because nobody remembers anybody who dies halfway. And I thought, that's really shallow. But actually, ever since then, I thought, he's right, isn't he? You just don't. You kind of like, it's always about forward momentum. You kind of like carry forward like that, and you don't look back. And it's not a reflective medium in the way that like a novel is or something like that. It's always about forward motion, really. So we wanted to, the 3 parts we made very different in all aspects: music, the format which we used, the places we shot. And we wanted to make it feel like it was progressing and moving forward into a future, which is actually, ironically, 1998, but it felt like it's moving into the future. Yeah.
But that's a really interesting point. I mean, anyone who knows the trajectory of Steve Jobs' career knows that a lot of stuff came before this movie starts, and a lot of stuff came afterwards. So you're jumping us you're jumping right into the thick of it, and you leave us at a certain pivotal moment. How much did you feel like you needed to kind of get, sort of read up on this topic and get to know kind of the other details that aren't there in order to tackle this particular person and his accomplishments?
I mean, it was very complete. I mean, we changed some things, and he was wonderful to work with Aaron to make changes. He was very flexible. He has a reputation that he's not, and he was, and completely, both with us in prep and then with the actors in actual, in rehearsals. Hugely flexible, but it was pretty much fully formed. Yeah, you do your research. You want to make sure that you do your research, and the Walter Isaacson book is very thorough. It's an enormous fund of knowledge that you can turn to. And obviously, it had been commissioned by Steve Jobs himself, although the family supposedly were not pleased with it by the end. He had certainly commissioned it and gave, according to Isaacson anyway, gave him complete freedom to do whatever he wanted. Much in the way that Rupert Murdoch book, have you read that Rupert Murdoch book by Michael Wolff? Because you think, why did he, but he let that guy in and gave him complete access and complete freedom to write whatever he wanted. And it's weird. And he has a very interesting thesis at the end of that book, because he says he thinks it's because Murdoch has this instinct in him. He's a gambler. And he likes to shake things up uncontrollably occasionally. When he thinks things are settling too much, he just wants to introduce the shock wave to everything. And that's why he did it. But why Jobs did it? I think maybe he just thought, because I think he knew he was ill, and maybe he just thought, I should hand it over somehow. And that the control thing that had dominated so much of his life and his work, and he's represented in the film very clearly, this end-to-end control he wants. Maybe he'd begun to let go of that a little bit. I don't know.
Well, it's a good point, because none of your characters are generally 100% perfect. And in some ways, it's a challenge to the traditional Hollywood mode of storytelling. I mean, there's a lot of ambiguity here. Were there ever moments when you were making the movie where you had to have a conversation about, would he really say this? Would he really be this mean? Or is he not being mean enough, maybe?
It's pretty well documented what he was like. And even those who adored him and were devoted to him, and there are many of those people, acknowledge that there was that side of him. So you can't really make this film in a kind of likable kind of way. It would be ludicrous to do that. Although that doesn't stop the executives ringing up saying, is there any chance he can be more likable, as they look to the Rushes. But, we'd hired the wrong actor, because Michael is, and the reason that we hired Michael is a brilliant actor, but he is also uncompromising in what he does. Those are his choices, that's his whole working method. It's, he's not going to look to make the guy have a bit more of the likability factor now and again. It's like, it's relentless pursuit of honesty and truth, as is presented to him by Sorkin's script, but yeah, no, the studio obviously are always trying to make things more likable.
Well, since you mentioned Fassbender, I mean, how much of that was you sort of giving him some guidance? I mean, we know he's a great actor, but this performance is its own class, really.
It is. I think it's on a different planet, and they're in a process. You can help a little bit, but it's not a lot. It's them really, and what you're doing is you're kind of using different tools to shape it, and to be sometimes in a way that you share with them, and sometimes in a way that's cunning, and you're not letting them know what you're doing in a way. But you are dedicated to the same thing, which is the deliverance of that performance. And you could feel he was. I mean, it's extraordinary. Those of you who've seen it in the first part, that sort of. I mean, it's very accurate, or it feels it to me, of this guy, and he's kind of trying to punch his way through the world, because he's got this vision, and there's so much resistance in the way, and he has to make people try and believe in something which was impossible to think of at the time. And that's why we start with the Arthur C. Clarke and the wall of, a room of computers, because they were intimidating, they were cold, impersonal, frightening things. And he is this guy with this vision of something that you will fall in love with, literally have a relationship with, that's like romantic. And it is true, isn't it? We go to bed, I'll bet of all you lot, 98% of you take it to bed with you. And it's the last thing you look at, and it'll be the first thing you look at when you wake up. And some of you will be leaving it on, monitoring what you're doing while you sleep. I mean, that's like the Spike Jonze film, isn't it? Which is absurd, but not so absurd. But he saw that. He knew it was going to go like that. So that's incredible. But anyway, so in that first act, Michael is also... I think you can see him wrestling with just the scale of what he's been asked to do. It's like a kind of wrestling match with this gigantic Hamlet, Lear, Hal part all wrapped in one, really. And what happened is that he's kind of, by the time we got to the third part, he'd done it. And you could feel him just like, he knew he was on it then. And it was weird. I mean, the crew will confirm this as well. He could have just read out the phone book. He could have just read out numbers in the phone book for 15 minutes, and we'd have just been watching him, because he'd kind of gone in a zone then, which was like, I have no idea what Jobs was like. I just know what you know from YouTube and stuff like that. But it felt authentic. Like it had that incredible, brutal truth about it, that it felt like this was... And I think that's what he does as an actor. He's trying to move towards that point. He's trying to zone in on that wave, really, that it's effortless, and you don't even have to be saying lines. You're just on it somehow,
And you also have to meld him with the environment, because, I mean, if he's great and everything else doesn't sync up, that would stand out. But you have these really interesting supporting roles, somebody like Kate Winslet, who's sort of chasing him around the whole time, or Seth Rogen, who pops up, and, that's a name that carries all kinds of expectations that I think this movie subverts in really interesting ways. So what was it like to kind of modulate expectations for those actors as well? Well,
she was dead. She wanted to do it because it was very different for her. She didn't want to, and people do watch it, and they sort of know Kate Winslet is in it, and they get to the end of the first part. A number of people said this, and they thought, oh, blimey, that must have been Kate Winslet, because otherwise she isn't in the movie. And they realised, in retrospect, so she loved that fact that she could lose herself in that. But it's very free performance, because her and Michael had a relationship much like they have in the film. They were kind of like lovers, except for the physical bit. I mean, it was just like, and they were like that. They were sort of bossy and catty and kind of all that kind of stuff with each other, really. Like a work couple, an absolute, the perfect work couple, reading each other's minds,
And a very convincing Polish accent, which helped.
An astonishing detail that she goes into with that side of it. I mean, the amount of time she spent on it. I mean, anyway. And Seth. Well, Seth, of course, we had Seth. We'd wanted Seth right from the beginning. And then, of course, he nearly closed the Sony studio with the whole... and it was like, that was the chance to get rid of him if there ever was one. But we didn't want to, because he was wonderful casting for Woz. Because he is Woz. He doesn't look like Woz, except he sort of does in a weird way. But he is Woz. Because Woz is an engineering genius, and Seth is a comedy genius. But they're also, the other side of him, as he argued, he's also a very decent man. Truly decent. And Woz is as well. And that's a wonderful thing, because he's got that great line. It's not binary, you know. You can be decent and gifted at the same time. And he truly embodies that, really, in a way that was really, it was lovely for me to witness. Because when you get a comedian and they want to do something proper and serious, it's a wonderful thing, you know, the transformation. You get something extra. I don't quite know what it is, but there is something special you get from them.
Well, speaking of transformation, we have to talk about the more specific visual strategy that you use here, which is that you shoot in different formats, which is a bold feat for any filmmaker of any kind of scale, but it's especially interesting to see how you go from shooting on film to digital here, because it's not over the top, but it certainly does have different kinds of connotations. So what was it like to approach a movie like that?
Yeah, it was weird. It was Kuchler. We had this cinematographer, Alvin Kuchler. We made this film together, Sunshine. He's a wonderful cinematographer, and he moved to America. He's from Germany originally, from Dusseldorf, but he was based in London. Amazing cinematographer. Bit precious. We had a few battles on Sunshine about schedule and stuff like that. But he's changed. He's moved to America and he changed. No, he did move to America because he's got a young daughter who's brilliant at tennis. And if you're going to be any good at tennis, you have to move to Florida. So they did. They moved to Florida. You know, seriously, it's like, it's proper. You have to be, and anyway, and so he started working within the American system, and it changed him a bit, I think. He got knocked about a bit, I think. He did some big movies, some really big movies, and but he is wonderful as well. And anyway, we started talking about how we would separate the 3 acts, and he said, why don't we do it on 3 different formats? You know, and it is great because, of course, there's all that discussion at the moment about will film survive, and certain filmmakers insist still on using it, but they're the only ones, and everything else is, the equipment is being packed away and put in museums and stuff like that, you know. But suddenly we had a last chance in a way. 16, I don't know how much longer 16 will survive, because it's very time consuming to work on it now, because you have to wait so long for it to be processed. But we did the first act on 16 because it felt like homemade. You know, it wasn't just about that it looked slightly old. It felt homemade. You know, because it was rough, slightly rough, and he is at that. Even though he's worth $400 million already, he thinks of himself as an absolute rebel. You know, and knocking down the great edifice of IBM. You know, a pirate. They call themselves pirates. And so it suited that kind of punkish spirit, really. That's what it felt like. And it also helped disguise the fact that the actors were pretending that they were 27, when in fact they were 39 or 40. That helps because it's so soft. I mean, we've got so used to high def now. When you look at 16, it's like nothing's in focus. It's like everything's soft in it, you know. So. And then we moved to 35 because the second part is it's about an illusion, really, and it's a very ornate, conceited act or part of the story where this computer is launched that actually isn't what it seems, and we set it in an opera house, the opera house in San Francisco, which is a Beaux Arts theatre, and it's very gilded and ornate and 35 is a beautiful medium for that. It soaks it up, and it's a wonderful, you know, it's the ultimate storytelling format, really, in a way, and one was still addicted to. I don't think most people see the huge difference in the formats as it happens, but you hope something unconscious is conveyed to people as well. And then we moved to the future, which was the Alexa camera, which is the camera of the choice of the moment. You know, there is a digital camera with huge resolution, and historically speaking, it's not quite accurate. It wasn't around in '98. We hadn't really moved to the red or anything like that. But of course, Jobs had, because he'd already released Toy Story in '96, and I remember seeing Toy Story in a cinema with my kids and being really shocked in a way that you probably remember it the first time you saw it. It was like, this has changed everything. I mean, you rarely get a moment like that in your life where you think, holy shit, everything's going to be different from now on, which it was in the animated world. So we wanted to sort of reflect that. And then the designer, Guy Hendricks Dias, he designed this dressing room that looked like his mind. He got everything he wanted, the clean lines, the cool colours, everything was what he wanted it to be, yeah.
So we're going to open it up to an audience Q&A here. Maybe just before we go to questions, you started out by saying how you'd never really done a project like this before. So how has it affected what you want to do going forward?
No, you always want to. I want to have a break from Aaron Sorkin because you end up talking like him, though not quite as well. But the words go round in your head, and you're having these discussions with people, and you suddenly start using phrases that are in the film because there's quite a turn on them, and you think, and you feel a bit of a charlatan, to be absolutely honest, because everybody. So you got to have a bit of a break from Aaron, I think. But no, we're doing a sequel to Trainspotting. We're actually, yeah. No, so we've got a very good script by the original writer, John Hodge, who wrote the original screenplay of the first one. And it's like 20 years later, and it's the same actors, and it's sort of it's like 20 years later in a friendship, really. So that's what we're going to do next year.
Very exciting. All right, let's take these questions. Start right up front here.
I was quite frankly blown away by looking at the film, and I emphasize looking because so much of what Jobs did was aesthetically pleasurable. And I wondered what how you contained yourself within knowing that every Mac or Apple lover is going to look at this film and see how does it look and how does it sound. I mean, in the relationship with the production designer and the sound designer.
Yeah, well, he's worked. The production designer had worked for. He'd actually worked for Apple and Sony, years ago. So he'd done a lot of the product stuff, really. That's some of his background. So he was very smart on all that, really. And we were in the right town. We deliberately shot in San Francisco. You can save a lot of money, which the studio wanted us to. You can film in Hungary and save $5 million. You can shoot in London and save $3 million. All the tax breaks, because it's just interiors of theatres, people argued. But we really wanted to shoot in San Francisco because obviously that town has changed the world. I mean, literally in the last 30 years. And we're just living through it now, and who knows where we're going to end up because of it. So it felt like the right thing to do, and there were many hidden benefits you got from that, one of which, of course, was not so hidden. There's lots of people there who are experts, in fact, who were at the original launches and actually came back and gave us advice about how to do it and got the equipment working. But I mean, the equipment, we had this kid called Thomas Fricker who was at college in North Carolina or somewhere like that. And he flew in. He's the only guy that could get this computer working, one of the next computers. I mean, they just, he's a digital native, and he came in for free and helped us. And so there's a lot of devotion to the man and the history and, how important these products are to like my generation, but also younger generations as well. So that was wonderful, yeah. And the music, well, Daniel's here. Yeah, there he is. He did the music. That's Daniel Pemberton up there in the corner. And he's and we talked actually about we're just going to go off and do a Q&A together actually with the editor, Elliot. Are you here, Elliot? No, Elliot's not here. Yeah, there he is. So that's our editor actually. Yeah. Elliot Graham. And they were amazing because what we did is I don't know whether you know this, but what you do when you make a film, especially if you're going to be guaranteed some kind of release, you do test screenings and stuff. So the habit has grown, which is in the last 20 years, I guess, of temp music. So you shoot the film and you put temp music on it, and it's usually either from another movie or it's songs or something like that. And then you test it, and if your testing goes well, the composer then is in a terrible place because you go, Daniel, this is tested really well when it sounds exactly like this. And then can he do something completely original, or does he do an imitation of that? And we wanted to try and avoid that on this. So what we did is Daniel worked on stuff like Ennio Morricone does, which is that he wrote a lot of it before we started. We just talked about the 3 different acts and what we wanted, and then he watched rushes as they came in. But before he saw cuts, he would, and then Elliot would cut the film to the music. So that when we were ready, we'd show it to Daniel and say, well, it's your music, Daniel. It's working really well. So do a kind of a version of that. So it's sort of weird. And we were really, it doesn't seem like it, but it's a very innovative way of working, which was very, I mean, Ennio Morricone does it, so it's not completely innovative, but that's supposedly how they work. But eh? Well, versions of it, really. I mean, Daniel updated them and changed them and stuff like that, but actually, yeah, it was... and there were 3 different musical approaches to each act. Obviously, the middle act's very operatic, and the first act's very early computer sounds.
Let's take a question from over here, and see a hand down near the front in the hat. Yeah.
I won't brag about the glorious football match between Arsenal and Man U yesterday, but... No, I'm just kidding. My question is, I grew up using the iMac.
You'll regret that, mate. Come the end of the season, you'll think back. You'll think back. You'll look at the grosses of the Steve Jobs movie, and you'll look at the Premier League table, and you'll remember.
I used the iMac when I was in grade school, and I was just astounded by how accurately it was reproduced. And could you talk about that process? Because watching that, actually, the iMac brought tears to my eyes, because I used that. And I remember when they cycled out the old Mac, those old Macs that were like brown, and they cycled those out and got those new ones in. I remember using those.
I know, amazing, isn't it? Well, of course, that was his dream, because, I mean, that is the turning point, because more than any other computer, it put the internet in everybody's home, and we got one in our home. But the other thing, even more importantly than that, is it made computers cool. I mean, properly cool, like desirable, sexy cool, which you'd never been able to describe a computer as sexy before then. But suddenly it was sexy and cool, and that's what he wanted. So that the process by which we would eventually take these things to bed with us had begun, really. They were a bit cumbersome at that time, still, to actually take to bed with you, but it was on the cards. We were on the slope then, and I think that's what. So it was great to do it, because, and it's the cheat in the whole film, because we never show any of the launches, but of course in that one, because you get the beginning of the third act where he's practicing, you get a little bit of the launch, and you see a little bit what they did.
Did you actually have the old iMacs left over to use, or did you have to redesign it?
You can get them eBay. It's just like you get anything on eBay. I mean, literally, it's like unbelievable what you can get on eBay. Yeah, seriously.
Question way in the back there.
Thanks so much. Just 2 quick questions. Today happens to be October 5th, which is the 4th anniversary of Steve Jobs' death. If you have any comment on that. And second, I'm aware that Irvin Welsh actually wrote the sequel to Trainspotting a number of years ago. Is your and John Hodges' screenplay going to have anything to do with that?
I mean, Irving's involved as a kind of, he's involved as one of the partners on the film. We've set up a sort of partnership amongst us all to make the film, and he's one of the partners of the film. It's the idea of them coming back together again. In the book, it's 10 years. Ours is 20 years, and it's very different, really. So, but it will be called an adaptation, but it won't be called porno. We're going to try and call it T2. If we can get James Cameron's lawyers to permit us, we will call it T2. But we may have to do something crafty and call it something else. I don't know. But anyway, we'll see. Yes, and it is the anniversary. It's the anniversary of his passing away. But there's no. I mean, our film is released on Friday, but there was no intention of that coinciding at all. There was no, because you don't want to kind of. It's a personal loss for people. But he is a huge figure and a huge public figure who has shaped our lives, and I always felt it was very important that these films are made, just like Social Network was made, just like The Circle, that's a book I love, the Dave Eggers book, which is sort of about Google and Apple all together, really, in the future, and it's very important to keep making these films about these people. So,
there's another question up here. Who can get there first?
Steve Jobs, I guess the word you'd use is intimidating. I actually had a chance to interview him, and he was intimidating. How did you, in interacting with Michael, did you get that feeling of intimidation from him, or did you give him Where was that interaction? Was there an intimidating element throughout?
Michael is a very intimidating actor. I mean, I think you know from his roles, he's a very nice guy, but actually his roles, his screen persona is intense, you know. He's also, which I think you got a little glimpse of in the Tarantino movie, in Inglourious Bastards, he's also got a touch of the Cary Grant in there, which is what, you know, you don't see, he's very funny. You know, very witty. And you don't see it, it's not a laugh out loud film, this one, but he's setting up gags, him and Winslet. They're just setting up stuff for each other. And it's the actor's reflex of understanding wit and humour, you know, which we benefited from. But he is intimidating, and I think it's wonderful for the part, because he clearly, when Joanna Hoffman, the real Joanna Hoffman came in and talked to us, and she used to say, that's what she said to Michael, make sure you get that glare. Make sure you get that glare, because it was there when he needed it. And Michael can do that. Absolutely no problem at all. And it is about that you're not like recreating reality. You're trying to produce something of the same intense or even more intensity than reality. That's sort of what we were trying to do. So it wasn't an impersonation, or, you know, he wasn't meant to look exactly like him all the time. And we didn't want him to have prosthetic surgery or, you know, knock his teeth out or all those kind of things, which is the slippery slope when you do the kind of impersonation, which is how far do you go, you know, to turn people into somebody else. And we wanted him to arrive at it in a different way, which he did, I think. So
Yeah. So let's take one more quick one. All right, let's do that guy.
You've probably been asked this question before, but a couple of years ago there was a movie about Steve Jobs. And my first question, have you seen it? And my second, have you had this thought that I have to do something better than that it was before? And second question, when you film a movie based on a true story, do you feel like there is less space for art and more that we have to stick with the documentary, with the story?
I haven't seen, know the movie you're referring to, but which I have seen. I hadn't seen it. I watched it, obviously, once we'd started the project, because I didn't want to copy anything inadvertently. Just because that's boring, you know, you wouldn't want to you wanted to do it differently. I haven't seen Gibney's documentary, because we didn't get a chance to see it, and it's so close to our opening now, but I'll look forward to seeing it. The big thing for me was actually Social Network, actually. And a lot of people said, oh, don't reference that. You know, look at the West Wing and stuff like that. But actually, the fact that Fincher had done one of these, I found enormously helpful. And it was a film I loved when it came out, and I studied it quite carefully, you know, and I saw what amazing work he did on it to actually, again, deliver it and enhance it, you know. And it's an amazing movie because it is a sitting down movie. It's literally the whole movie, I mean, a major motion picture, and people very rarely stand. And that's amazing, actually, if you think about it. Very clever the way he does it. And then when he does stand, like when, I don't know if you remember the amazing scene when Garfield stands and goes over and smashes the computer on them when he realizes he's been betrayed. It's just incredible power about it. You know, so it's very clever, all that. So I found that very helpful and as an inspiration. And ours was all a standing-up movie, because Jobs was into the walk and talk, which is featured in that other film as well. You know, that, and people spoke about him. He would much prefer to walk and talk rather than actually have meetings in front of whiteboards and stuff like that. So that was the bigger influence rather than any other movie, actually. And I felt that we are in a lineage very much from Social Network with this film. And I'm very proud to be like that with it, really. And if it's half as good, we'll have come out well out of it, you know. So that was the idea, yeah.
Well, you've certainly captured something real, as evinced by all the iPhones that have been popping up over the course of the last half hour. I'd like to ask everyone to please stay seated so Danny can bolt out of here. But thanks for being here, and thanks for being so great.
Thank you. Thanks, man. Well done, all. Cheers.